We are talking Jeepers Creepers Reborn. Although they should have just gone ahead and called it Jeepers Creepers Reboot. And this one is directed by Timo Vuosila. That's probably not how you pronounce his name, but that's as best as I can do. And this serves as a kind of soft reboot, although it is actually in continuity with the original movies. This one taking place after the Jeepers Creepers 2, the kind of the next kind of sleep cycle. So it's dealing with kind of different characters and things like that. But it is going to be a somewhat kind of continuation, albeit it is kind of like a little bit of a reboot as well. And obviously the original director-writer here, Victor Salva, is not involved because he had a certain amount of controversy, which I won't go into. So this is the first movie where he is kind of completely, not involved. And, there are many people who are involved in the original movies, including Jonathan Beck, who played the Creeper, again, not involved. And apparently there was plans for a kind of a third movie that was actually kind of the brainchild of Victor Salva, but that has been rejected in favour of this. So what is this movie? What is this kind of movie about? So it takes place in the next kind of sleep cycle, and the original movie, I believe, was 2001, so it's broadly speaking, within that kind of, or just slightly under the sleep cycle that the Creeper has. So here he is kind of awakening again, and he takes a fancy to this young woman who happens to kind of be in the area, who is in the early stages of pregnancy, and her boyfriend is a big horror geek, and they are going to this kind of horror convention called Horror Hound, I believe it's called. But along the Creeper, there also seems to be some Creeper acolytes that are somehow kind of serving him, and we get a group of people kind of trapped within this kind of house. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss what I think works in this movie. So I feel this movie is, one of the things it does is try and be a little bit meta, which I actually thought was quite interesting. So in this universe, obviously we know that this is a continuation of those events, so it does take place in universe, but there have been, Jeepers Creepers movies made, kind of a little bit like Blair Witch 2 in that respect. So there have been kind of Jeepers Creepers movies made, and that's kind of it's part of kind of popular culture, and obviously there's the real legend, so to speak, things like this. So it kind of speaks to kind of modern fandom in some ways, and we kind of go to this kind of horror festival and things like that, and there's lots of kind of cool cosplays and that sort of thing. They could have done more with that, I will say, but nonetheless, we do get some kind of fun, just general kind of horror kind of references within this kind of movie. Now this movie was actually filmed primarily in Hampshire in the UK, which is where I'm from. So I was kind of seeing if I could spot anything, although it's just pretty much woodland area. But yeah, so it was actually filmed in the UK, albeit it has, it's meant to be set in the States. Lots of kind of English actors kind of putting on American kind of accents here. There are some kind of like quite interesting kind of gothic designs. It's kind of this haunted kind of graveyard, this old dilapidated house. Arguably a little bit over-designed, you might say, at some points. But nonetheless, there are some kind of creepy looking sets here and things like this. And we do get a kind of a brief appearance from Dee Wallace at the kind of the prologue of the movie. Of course, a kind of a horror veteran herself. And there are one or two sequences I thought had a reasonable amount of gore. There's, for example, a bit where he pulls a brain out of this kind of girl's head and things like that, which I thought was kind of quite well done. But what doesn't work? Okay, now the third movie was a little bit of a step down, it could be fair to say, compared to the first two, which I quite enjoyed. Now, I've never really thought the Creeper really seemed all that logical as a kind of a horror icon, a movie villain, so to speak. It always struck me as like, how's he learned to drive? Where's he get his clothes from? And I guess you could say that maybe these acolytes are kind of responsible for that. But there are always questions for me about, like, it doesn't really seem like it would follow any type of rules, if that makes it. Just more just what the kind of the movie wants it to do. And I feel this movie goes one step further in that. Without spoiling anything, it kind of has these elements that are involved, a lot of it involving these kind of like, this kind of white raven and things like this, that kind of like, I don't know, it just seems to be making up kind of mythology, so to speak, because that's what the script needs it to do. So there's things that are involved here that I feel, again, I'm not going to spoil it for you, a few elements that are introduced that I didn't really seem, you know, all that they fit to the kind of the mythology. Now, I think the idea here is to expand the mythology, but I feel sometimes, you know, when you kind of do that, you kind of dilute what I think maybe makes the kind of the subject interesting to start with. I feel, my personal feeling is that's kind of what's done here. The movie is incredibly simple. There's not really a particularly kind of complex plot. Now, arguably, you could say neither were the original movies, but this movie doesn't really seem to get started in earnest until the third act. You know, it feels like we don't really get that kind of the real bulk of the story until kind of the, you know, 2/3 of the way through the movie. And then when we do get that, it's just kind of people running around rooms in a house. So this movie was particularly kind of simple. Now, despite what you may think of the third movie, at least that tried, I think, to have a little bit more of an interesting kind of plot. This one, to me, was just kind of like a by the numbers, easy to kind of produce and write kind of horror script, if you ask me. The actual creeper himself, obviously played by a different actor now, I feel looks significantly different from the what we've kind of previously seen. Now, arguably, you could say he's kind of been reborn again, so he kind of looks a little bit different, but he kind of looks just like, I don't know, he looks more like an orc in kind of some sequences, I thought. I didn't really think he had that interesting look, and he doesn't have that personality either. I feel the creeper had a little bit of a almost Freddy Krueger-esque kind of style of personality on the kind of the previous movies. Although it's not kind of to the extent of Freddy Krueger, you know, you get the sort of hints there, but here that's completely kind of gone. And actually, in fact, I really didn't feel like we saw a huge amount of the creeper, if we're being completely honest. Yeah, I mean, he's there a reasonable amount, but he just doesn't really seem to have much presence. The effects as well are on the weaker side. Now, I don't think the makeup effects are as good. Again, they've tried to do something a little different, so maybe that's just a personal opinion. But there are effects outside the creeper that I thought were a little weaker as well. For example, there's a lot of use of green screen here, which I think is really noticeable. A little bit of use of kind of CGI and these kind of like bird effects I really didn't think were particularly kind of good. The other aspect I have to say as well is I don't think the acting was particularly strong. It wasn't car crash bad, but I didn't think it was strong. Now, this is partly down to I think because they've shot in England and they've used primarily English actors having to put on American accents. I feel that adds an extra layer of difficulty for the actors, especially if they're not kind of like, you know, seasoned pros. They're relatively kind of like unknown actors. I always feel it kind of gives an extra kind of level of pressure. I see it all the time in low budget kind of B movies, and yeah, it never really quite feels authentic and adds an extra layer of, I think, of kind of fakey acting, if that makes sense. Now, this isn't as bad as some of the kind of the lower budget movies that I've reviewed, and I actually think it kind of, I think it would fool most people into kind of thinking they are American. But as such, the acting, I feel, sometimes feels a little bit stilted. But it's not helped by a script where I feel it makes for particularly kind of believable kind of dialogue, or the way these kind of characters are kind of, you know, are portrayed on screen. It just seems a little bit that kind of fake, you know, fake behaviour that you wouldn't really kind of see in a realistic kind of scenario. Now, that might not bother some people because, you know, movies have been doing that since the year dots, but I feel when you combine it with the rest of the kind of the elements of this movie, you know, it comes across as some characters that really didn't seem like particularly kind of believable characters, and therefore you kind of you don't really feel like you can root for them all that much. Now, we were introduced to this kind of horror festival, which I thought was quite a neat idea, but there's precious little done with it. I kind of thought we might get a you know, a kind of creeper attack scene within this kind of festival, and it hints that maybe that might have been the thought at one point, but it just kind of goes a bit gun shy with that, unfortunately. And then when we do talk about the kills, there are a lot of it is off screen or kind of obscured and things like that. There's, as I said, there's one kind of sequence which I think was the gore effects were quite good, but for the most part, I actually thought the kills and the kind of the gore were just chosen to kind of like look away in another direction, or not particularly kind of like brutal or you know, or particularly graphic. And then the actual ending, which I'm not going to spoil for you, you know, I didn't think it landed. Without spoiling it for you, I'll just say I didn't think it was particularly a good ending. So this movie, to me, it feels like a very much by the numbers horror movie, but is detracted further by some kind of weaker decisions within that. I have to say, I actually think the third movie is better, if I'm completely honest. I didn't really like that one all that much. This one just feels like a very basic, quickly produced movie that is meant to be a sort of refresher of the kind of the series, but I think is dooming it now to, you know, straight to VOD obscurity. For me, this is a 3 out of 10. There was some ideas that I think could have been expanded upon and improved upon, but for the most part, it's a little bit of a miss. Maybe if you just kind of really want to watch more from the creeper, you'll kind of get something out of it. But I actually feel that this will upset more fans than it will please. So it's a 3 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.